Tonight, we examine a controversial and deeply sensitive question surrounding the American justice system and the handling of one of the most notorious criminal networks of the modern era, connected to the convicted trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell and her longtime associate Jeffrey Epstein. A case that has generated intense debate across political institutions, the media, and the public sphere, because it touches not only on crimes of exploitation, but also on the credibility of powerful institutions that are expected to enforce the rule of law without favoritism or political influence. And the specific controversy we are examining revolves around testimony given before the United States House Judiciary Committee by the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, who was questioned by lawmakers about the prison transfer of Maxwell and the broader handling of matters connected to the Epstein network. And during that testimony, Bondi stated that Maxwell had been moved to what she described as a facility of the same level, a statement that immediately became the focus of scrutiny because critics argued that the transfer involved a move from a federal correctional institution in Florida to a minimum security prison camp in Texas. And in the federal prison system, these two categories of facilities are not identical because minimum security camps typically impose fewer restrictions on inmates, offer greater freedom of movement, and are designed for prisoners considered low security risks, which created a perception among some observers that Maxwell may have received preferential treatment despite being convicted of serious crimes involving trafficking of minors. And the question of who authorized the transfer became even more controversial because Bondi stated during the hearing that she learned of the move only after it had already taken place and suggested that the decision was handled by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, an agency that operates under the authority of the United States Department of Justice, meaning that although the Bureau of Prisons manages day-to-day correctional decisions, the Attorney General ultimately oversees the department responsible for the federal prison system, which is why lawmakers repeatedly asked who signed the paperwork authorizing the transfer and whether any senior officials within the Department of Justice had been involved in the decision, particularly because reports indicated that Maxwell had participated in meetings or interviews with senior Justice Department officials shortly before the transfer occurred, including a meeting with Todd Blanche, who previously served as a defense attorney for former President Donald Trump before being appointed to a senior role within the department. And the timing of those interactions raised questions among critics who wondered whether the meetings and the transfer were connected or whether they simply occurred close together by coincidence. And while there has been no publicly confirmed evidence demonstrating that Blanche personally ordered or influenced the transfer, the sequence of events has nevertheless fueled speculation and political argument because the Epstein case itself has long been surrounded by allegations that powerful individuals may have avoided scrutiny or accountability. And that perception has contributed to widespread public frustration because despite years of investigations and the enormous amount of media coverage surrounding Epstein's activities, only a limited number of individuals have faced criminal consequences, with Maxwell being the most prominent figure convicted in connection with the trafficking operation, which in turn has made the conditions of her imprisonment a symbolic issue for many observers, who believe the justice system must demonstrate absolute fairness when dealing with crimes involving abuse and exploitation. And during the congressional hearing, lawmakers emphasized that survivors of Epstein's trafficking network have expressed anger and distress when reports surfaced suggesting that Maxwell may be receiving privileges not typically available to other prisoners convicted of similar offenses. And some members of Congress argued that even the perception of special treatment undermines public confidence in the justice system because it creates the impression that individuals connected to wealthy or politically influential circles may receive different treatment than ordinary offenders. While supporters of the Justice Department responded by emphasizing that prison placement decisions are governed by administrative guidelines rather than political considerations, and that the Bureau of Prisons regularly transfers inmates between facilities for a variety of operational reasons, including space availability, security classifications, medical needs, and logistical planning, meaning that not every transfer necessarily indicates preferential treatment. Yet the issue remains controversial because minimum security camps are typically reserved for inmates who present the lowest risk of violence or escape, and because certain categories of offenders are often restricted from placement in such facilities, depending on the specifics of their convictions and institutional assessments, which is why lawmakers pressed Bondi repeatedly to clarify whether Maxwell met the criteria for the new facility and whether the Department of Justice had reviewed the transfer decision before or after it was implemented. And throughout the hearing, the discussion frequently shifted between the narrow question of Maxwell's prison conditions and broader political arguments about the administration's law enforcement priorities, with some representatives highlighting statistics about crime reduction, immigration enforcement, and efforts to combat organized gangs, while others insisted that those broader policy discussions should not distract from the specific question of whether the Department of Justice had exercised proper oversight in a high-profile case involving a convicted trafficker connected to an international scandal. And the tension during the hearing reflected a deeper divide in American politics over how institutions should be held accountable when controversies arise, because congressional oversight is one of the primary mechanisms through which elected representatives examine the actions of executive branch agencies. Yet such hearings often become politically charged when they involve prominent figures or cases that have already captured public attention. And in the Maxwell matter, the stakes are particularly high, because the Epstein network has been linked to a wide array of powerful individuals across business, finance, and politics, which has fueled ongoing demands from journalists, activists, and some lawmakers for the release of additional documents related to the investigation, including records that might clarify the full extent of the trafficking operation and identify other individuals who may have participated in or benefited from it. And while various court proceedings and document releases have provided fragments of information over the years, many files remain sealed or partially redacted due to privacy laws, ongoing investigations, or legal disputes, leaving large gaps in the public understanding of how the network operated and who may have been involved. And this lack of transparency has helped sustain public suspicion that important facts have yet to be revealed, which in turn intensifies scrutiny whenever decisions affecting Maxwell or the remaining legal cases are reported, including issues such as prison conditions, appeals, or potential requests for clemency, although there has been no confirmed indication that a presidential pardon is currently under consideration. Speculation about that possibility has circulated periodically, because the United States Constitution grants the president broad authority to grant pardons or commutations for federal offenses, an authority that has historically been used in a wide range of circumstances, but that often becomes controversial when applied to politically sensitive cases. And for critics of the Justice Department, the Maxwell transfer controversy therefore represents a broader test of whether the system can convincingly demonstrate impartiality in the face of intense public pressure, while defenders argue that administrative decisions inside the prison system should not automatically be interpreted as political interference without clear evidence of wrongdoing. And as investigations, oversight hearings, and media inquiries continue, the central issue remains the same fundamental question that lawmakers repeatedly raised during the hearing: who specifically authorized the transfer, and whether the decision followed established federal guidelines. Because in a democratic system, public trust in legal institutions depends heavily on transparency and accountability, and when uncertainty surrounds the actions of powerful officials, it can erode confidence in the rule of law itself. Which is why congressional committees continue to request documentation, testimony, and internal records from the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons in order to reconstruct the chain of decisions that led to Maxwell's relocation. And until those records are fully examined, the debate will likely continue, with some observers viewing the controversy as evidence of systemic favoritism, while others see it as a routine administrative matter that has been amplified by the extraordinary notoriety of the Epstein case. Yet regardless of which interpretation ultimately proves correct, the episode illustrates how deeply the Epstein scandal has affected public perceptions of justice and power in the United States, because the crimes themselves exposed a network of exploitation that spanned decades and crossed national borders, and the demand for accountability from survivors and the public has not diminished even years after Epstein's death, meaning that every development connected to the investigation, the court proceedings, or the incarceration of those convicted in relation to the network will continue to attract intense scrutiny. And as the oversight process moves forward, the release of additional information may eventually clarify the circumstances surrounding the transfer, the role of Justice Department officials, and whether the Bureau of Prisons acted according to established policy or made an exceptional decision in this particular case. But until those answers are definitively established, the controversy will remain part of the ongoing debate over transparency, accountability, and equal treatment under the law within the American justice system.